This video is brought to you by NordVPN. Give yourself options online. Go to nordvpn.com/TopTenz to get a 2-year plan with a huge discount, plus an additional month for free. More on them in a bit. The human body is a weird and wonderful thing. Sometimes we seem soft and malleable compared to all the other creatures in the world. We're not well designed for life in the wild, and our young can't take care of themselves for years compared to some animals, which can be up and running around within hours of being born. Despite our apparent fragility, every once in a while comes a human who can survive against amazing odds. Number 10. The Drunken Baker on the Titanic. Charles Joffin was the chief baker aboard the Titanic. The ship sank, and around 1,500 people drowned. Joffin joined them in the water and simply swam around until morning, when he was pulled out alive and well. This prompted many people to wonder how he survived in the exact same conditions which caused so many others to perish. As it happens, the secret to Joffin's survival was that he was fully expecting not to survive. So, in honor of his impending demise, he drank like a fish. Not seawater, mind you, but alcohol. It was a baffling mix of circumstances that kept the man alive. Normally, alcohol would make you more susceptible to hypothermia. However, in life-threatening situations, alcohol has another unique effect on the human body. It basically makes you ignore the physical danger that you're in. Evidence has shown that victims of serious trauma, things like stab wounds and gunshots, are more likely to survive the drunker they are. Likewise, if you go to a hospital in the freezing cold, you're better suited to handle the effects on your body if you're smashed. So, as the Titanic was going down, Joffin sent his staff out to stock the lifeboats with food to keep people alive. He then forced people onto the lifeboats who were hesitant about going, neglecting his own safety to ensure that he saved as many people as possible. As those left on the boat began to panic the closer they got to submersion, Joffin kept a cool head and continued to drink. When water rushed around his feet, he started throwing deck chairs overboard so at least people would have temporary flotation devices. And then he went back to his cabin and got another drink. Word is that he was on the stern of the boat when it actually broke in half. He apparently made his way to the stern rail and just rode the sinking ship down into the ocean. Once in the ocean, it was cold shock that killed many of the initial victims, reacting to the intense shift in temperature and either drowning in a panic or causing a quick loss of body temperature. Joffin just swam around a little and mostly decided to tread water. The alcohol in his system didn't make it warmer, but it did make him face it more calmly, and that likely kept him alive. Number 9. 9/11 survivor. Nobody needs to be told about September the 11th, 2001. And while we all know the tragic loss of life that occurred that day, what few people have heard of are the stories of those who survived against all odds in these incredible circumstances. One such survivor was Pascal Bazelli, a 34-year-old structural engineer. He had an office on the 64th floor of the North Tower, where he was working at 10 a.m. on September the 11th. He tried to evacuate along with the others, but only reached the 22nd floor of the building when it began to shake and the stairs moved underneath him. He could hear things crashing to the ground above his head, and he ducked into a corner and hoped for the best. The walls literally fell on top of him, and he experienced the sensation of falling. Remember, he's on the 22nd floor of the North Tower at this point. The next thing he remembers, it was 2 hours later, and he was on a giant slab of concrete 180 feet lower than where he started. There was smoke, dust, and fire all around, but he was alive. His leg hurt, alerting him to the fact that somehow he was not dead yet. He used his shirt as a mask and started calling for help. A nearby firefighter heard him. Rescuers pulled him from the fire and debris, and incredibly, he only suffered a fractured foot. The emotional damage was worse, and it took longer to deal with, but his amazing story of survival was rare indeed, as he was only one of 42 people who somehow survived the collapse. Number 8. Louis Zamperini. If you don't know the name Louis Zamperini, you should. He's one of the closest things we have to a real-life superhero. The man's life story is so unbelievable that if someone like Tom Hardy played him in a biopic, you'd assume that the whole thing was just made up. His life was, in fact, turned into a movie, but he was played by an actor named Jack O'Connell. The movie was called Unbroken, directed by Angelina Jolie. Known for being a bit of a troublemaker in his youth and apparently the leader of a children's criminal empire in his early years, he straightened himself out by the time he was in high school to become one of California's best student athletes. He was the youngest distance runner to ever make the Olympic team. It's his service in the war that makes him stand out as a bit of an action star, though. Serving as a B-24 bombardier during the Second World War, his plane nearly ran out of fuel on one run and just barely made it back to the Midway Atoll. Later, his B-24 was shot up by Japanese Zeros, which killed most of the crew, but the rest, including Zamperini, made it back to base alive despite the 600 bullet and shrapnel holes in the plane. In 1943, Zamperini's luck ran out as his plane went down over the Pacific. 3 of the 11 crew members survived, Zamperini, along with his pilot and tail gunner. He was lost at sea for 47 days, but managed to survive even after being strafed by 0 pilots who shot the men afloat. After drifting for an absolutely mind-boggling 2,000 miles, the Japanese Navy found the castaways and he became a POW. He was held for 2 years and suffered torture before being released. Later in life, he even wrote a letter forgiving his former torturers for what they did. Number 7. Brian Udell survived a supersonic ejection. If you've never heard of Brian Udell, then you're missing out on one of the most incredible survival stories ever. Udell is the only person in the world to ever survive a supersonic ejection from a jet. That means he was traveling faster than the speed of sound when he ejected from his craft. Udell was traveling at nearly 800 miles per hour when a computer malfunction rendered the plane's avionics useless. They were in a 60-degree right turn at the time things went wrong, and the jet was headed straight for the ocean at supersonic speeds. At 10,000 feet, Udell gave the order to eject. The handle was pulled at 6,000 feet. Co-pilot Dennis Wiart ejected at 3,000 feet. Udell ejected at 1,500. The force was so intense it pulled his helmet and mask right off of his head. His parachute deployed at 500 feet. Wiart died immediately upon ejection, but Udell survived, albeit with incredible injuries. Doctors told him he'd likely never walk again. He proved them wrong, though, and within 6 months he was up on his feet. In 10 months, he was flying missions again. Number 6. The first man on the beaches of Normandy. When soldiers stormed the beach at Normandy, it must have been an utterly chaotic scene. Many filmmakers have tried to recreate that moment in the years since, notably the incredibly violent and dramatic opening scene from the movie Saving Private Ryan. But to have been there in real life would have been absolutely terrifying for each and every one of those soldiers who still pushed on. One thing that many people probably don't think about is how, in the midst of all that chaos, one man had to be first. One soldier had to be the first to set boot on that beach. His name was Leonard Schroeder. On D-Day 1944, Captain Schroeder was the first American soldier to set foot on the beaches of Normandy. Leading his company onto Utah Beach, Schroeder was shot twice. Despite his injuries, he took his men inland several miles and then passed out from blood loss. Schroeder never planned to be the first on the beach, and he didn't really revel in the attention that he got later in life. But the fact is, he did have a later life to speak of. He survived the war, returned home, and lived all the way to the age of 90. Alright, we'll get back to today's video in just a second, but first, got a quick word from today's video sponsor, NordVPN. Look, I run like 47 YouTube channels, so I'm online a lot, and I talk to people every week who are using the internet with no protection, no VPN. Like they're back in the 1990s. When someone tells me they don't have a VPN, I automatically assume that they also love their 900 channel cable package. VPNs aren't just a more modern way to use the internet, it's just straight up better, and with NordVPN, you can rest assured knowing that your internet use is safely behind a wall of next-generation encryption. Block malware, bypass annoying ads that keep tracking your web traffic. It's just a more secure online experience. Worried about data logs? Well, don't be. NordVPN doesn't keep logs on your internet use because they know where you go online is none of their business. What they do give you is more than 5,000 server options scattered across 59 countries, so your IP can live wherever you want it to. Then that access could provide you with loads of new options from shopping to streaming. Just one click and you're good to go. So regardless of whether you're considering a VPN for yourself or as a gift for another internet user in your life, NordVPN gives you options. And right now you guys can take advantage of a special deal that NordVPN is running. Any purchase of a 2-year plan comes with a huge discount plus an additional month for free. And if you make a purchase and decide a VPN isn't for you, NordVPN offers a totally risk-free 30-day money-back guarantee. There's never been a better time to enhance your online experience with NordVPN, so head to nordvpn.com/TopTenz or use the code TopTenz at checkout, or just follow the link in the description box below. And now back to today's video. Number 5. Adrian Carton to Wiart. Anytime they call a person unkillable, you know that it has to be a good story. That was the case with Adrian Carton de Wiart. With only one eye and one hand, de Wiart was in the Boer War, the First World War, and the Second World War. For his troubles, he was shot in the face, through the skull, in the hip, in the leg, in the ankle, and in the ear, and he survived it all. In the First World War alone, de Wiart was severely wounded 8 times. This was after his stint in the Boer War, where he was shot in the stomach and in the groin. When he had only one good hand to use, he held hand grenades in it and used his teeth to pull the pins out. An artillery barrage had ruined the appendage, and the doctor refused to amputate his fingers, so he tore them off himself. In the Second World War, he was shot down over the Mediterranean. He swam to shore and was captured by the Italians. He was in his 60s at this time, and he escaped the POW camp on numerous occasions, despite being elderly, one-handed, and having only one eye. After the war, he served as Winston Churchill's personal representative in China, and eventually died peacefully at the age of 83. Number 4. Alexander Selkirk. The story of Robinson Crusoe is a fantastic tale of a castaway full of adventure. Few people know it was actually based, at least in part, around the story of Alexander Selkirk. The Scottish sailor was known to be a bit of a loudmouth and have problems with authority, so it might not have been too much of a surprise when he got into a fight with his captain in the year 1704, telling the younger man to just leave him on a nearby island. The captain obliged, and Selkirk was given the old heave-hi. On the island, he had access to plenty of food in the form of feral goats, as well as wild turnips and other plants. Armies of rats would attack him at night, and apparently he managed to domesticate a number of feral cats to keep himself safe from them. Adapting to life as a castaway, he forged a knife out of barrel hoops and built 2 huts for himself, one for cooking and one for sleeping. At one point, while chasing a goat for food, he fell off a cliff and would have died if not for the fact that he actually landed on the goat. Selkirk was nearly captured twice by Spanish sailors, who surely would have killed him since he was a Scottish privateer. He managed to hide in a tree while his pursuers actually peed on it, not noticing he was inside it. It wasn't until the year 1709, over 4 years after he'd been left on the island, that he was finally rescued. Number 3. The Robertson Family. Usually when it comes to survival at sea, you'll hear the tale of one incredible person who perseveres when it seems like all hope is lost. And then there's the story of the Robertson family, all of whom survived for 38 days in a 9-foot dinghy before being rescued. In 1971, the Robertson family, which consisted of Dougal and Lynn, plus their children Douglas, Sandy and Neil, along with a friend named Robin, who planned to sail around the world. Things went bad 200 miles from the Galapagos Islands when a pod of killer whales capsized the boat. The family took refuge in a life raft that deflated after 17 days before getting into the small dinghy. They had enough food for 10 days, which consisted of a bag of onions, a tin of biscuits, 10 oranges, 6 lemons, and half a pound of candy. Oh, and the water was also full of sharks. The family survived for 38 days at sea, in part because of the incredibly industrious thinking of Lynn Robertson. A nurse by trade, Lynn knew that drinking seawater was a death sentence for everyone. The family had also been trying to stay alive by drinking the blood from captured sea turtles, but it wasn't enough. So Lynn came up with a novel, if incredible, solution. Using repurposed rungs from a ladder, Lynn created makeshift enema tubes. The water from the bottom of the dinghy, which was a mix of rainwater, blood, and turtle guts, would have likely killed anyone trying to drink it, but if you took it as an enema, you could still absorb the water without digesting any of the dangerous elements, so that's what they did. By the time a Japanese fishing boat rescued them, no one had urinated for 20 days, and their tongues were so swollen that they couldn't even speak. Number 2. The Tree of Life. Amazing survival is not just limited to humans. Every so often nature pulls an amazing trick out from its hat, such as the case of the Tree of Life in Bahrain. This tree is thought to have been planted in 1582 and it sits atop a sandy hill at Bahrain's highest point. All around, the green and healthy looking tree is an arid desert. There is no water supply anywhere within sight, and there doesn't seem to be any water supply underground either. Obviously, the tree is getting water from somewhere, and it's believed that the tree has incredibly deep roots which extend a great distance into the earth to a depth of about 50 meters. Of course, some people say that the tree was planted at the site of the Garden of Eden and that's why it's still alive, and those people are incorrect. Number 1. Ernest Hemingway. Most people associate Ernest Hemingway with the image of a man's man. He was a writer, sure, but he was also a larger-than-life character as well, and throughout the course of his real life, he faced enough near-death experiences to pad out any fictitious tale beyond belief. In the First World War, he was an ambulance driver with the Red Cross. An Austrian mortar nearly killed him, ultimately leaving him with an aluminium kneecap and 237 pieces of shrapnel, by his account. Later, he nearly killed himself by shooting the calves of both legs while attempting to wrestle a shark off Key West. But arguably his most famous brushes with death came not from one, but 2 separate plane crashes that he managed to walk away from, and they happened in the span of 2 days. While on safari in Africa in 1954, the pilot of Hemingway's Cessna crashed after trying to avoid a flock of birds. He, his wife, and the pilot spent the night in the jungle, and then the next day got on another plane, which promptly crashed and caught fire. Hemingway was initially reported as having died in the crash, but then sometime later he walked out of the jungle with a bunch of bananas and a bottle of gin.